I'm David Benites from Extreme Vocal Institute, and today I'm going to answer even more of your questions. Julia in Major asks, how often do you suggest a beginner practice in a week? If you're a true beginner and you're still trying to get your false chord and your fries happening at all, even just that base level of distortion, there are going to be growing pains and stuff is going to take time. That being said, you want to spend a good amount of time with this, which is why to my beginners, I always recommend practicing a little bit every single day where you can. But this can be only a minute, it can be a few minutes, it can be maybe 10 minutes tops in a day, because your body's gonna fight this off for a little while. There are going to be things about screaming that your body is gonna view as red flags because this is such a new experience to both you and your body. So treat it accordingly. Listen to yourself, take breaks when you need to, but keep consistent with the days you're able to play with these sounds, and you'll get closer and closer to your voice, your body, and the rest of you becoming comfortable and accustomed to this new activity. Luis Fernando asks, how do false chord screams differentiate from Kargyra throat singing? False chord scream and Kargyra are really mostly the same. Let me explain. With Kargyra throat singing, you're using your regular voice, your vocal cords moving normally, and the vestibular folds, also known as the false chords, together to make very interesting types of sounds. Now, for the false chord scream, the same combination of things is happening with a little bit more intensity. If I add a little more airflow, a little more support, I do what I was doing like this, and start to change my mouth shape and the overall intensity of the sound, going from calm to intense, a little agitated, this can become something more like this. And you'll hear how much more of those vestibular folds, or the false chords, get involved. These combinations are really fun to play with, and there's lots of areas that you can experiment with in between as well. Confused Turtle asks, normally I can easily tell if I'm doing false chord or fry, but when I go particularly high, they start to feel identical no matter which one I start with. Sometimes being able to tell false chord and fry scream apart is really difficult. Sometimes depending on the note you're using for both, it can make them sound the same, or depending on the kind of person you are, the kind of voice you have, it can make them sound really similar to each other, especially when compared to someone else. This makes things pretty tough. An important thing to note is that the false chord scream is always going to emphasize a little bit of the lower end of what's going on because of the size of the tissue. If I pick a higher note, in my voice, and weaken it, and send that out into what we know as the fry scream, you can hear the higher end and how it really whooshes up into that territory. But if I kind of start to add the false chords, to that, same note into this sound, emphasizes the lower, whereas if I go into it, it emphasizes the higher. It's subtle, but it's there. Ragnar Norlord asks, is it normal that my throat hurts a little after screaming for 5 hours? You do not ever need to scream for like 5 hours straight. Let me explain. Being a great vocalist means really knowing how to pace yourself, and that means with your practice, in the studio, and live as well. There's never going to be a performance that requires you to vocalize for any more than an hour, maybe an hour and a half straight. And in the studio, you're able to take breaks whenever you want and need to. This is something that I instruct people to do all the time when they're recording. And when you're practicing, you definitely don't need to push this that hard, whether you're in the rehearsal room with a band or if you're just working on your own. It's really easy to want to go for that long or feel like you need to in order to compete, but pace yourself. Don't overdo it. There is such a thing as that, and you'll feel a lot better in what you're doing. Zaid Kronos says, I have a decently loud fry scream in person, but when I record it for a song, it sounds quiet and not powerful. If you notice that your voice sounds weaker in a recording than it does in real life, that's probably a recording issue, not really something you're doing here. When you're setting yourself up to record, depending on the equipment you have, you want to make sure your levels are set appropriately. You want to make sure the gain is set to the appropriate level to match the volume of whatever it is you're doing, that level of output, to make sure you're supplying the computer, supplying the recording with the correct amount of signal, correct amount of sound, correct amount of you to make everything work the way it needs to. And then there's other things from within the recording as well that can be done in terms of adjusting. If you're doing this for yourself on your own for the first time, there are a lot of parameters. This can be kind of confusing. Look up different stuff online in terms of how to shape things and level accordingly based on you, not you matching something else. Guy asks, how do you do a fry scream in your chest voice? I can do it in my falsetto, but it's really stiff in terms of range. Most of the music with fry scream in it is based on a bit of an upwards inflection. Like when we're having an emotional response, the voice goes up, the voice doesn't go down. So we often try to stuff the fry scream into the very top of the voice. And that's why we sometimes feel more comfortable here than we do in our chest voice. If you allow your speaking voice to weaken a little bit and break up slightly without going down or up to make that happen, and you can add the same sort of intensity and focus to turn that into your fry scream that you normally do up here, but now, more centralized where you would normally be. It'll still have all that intensity you're looking for and be nice and comfortable without feeling like it's stuck only in that one specific place. Evan Costco asks, when I'm doing low growl vocals, I tend to hear a lot of my normal voice pushing out. How do I make it so I can barely hear any of my voice and only get scream? For lower growls, if you're hearing a lot of voice, it means a lot of air and a lot of intensity and a more open mouth shape. If you back off of all three, lessen the air a little bit, start to back off the intensity, and then start to make the mouth shape smaller, you can get your scream even lower sounding, more intense, and remove some of our perception of how much voice is in there to make it so you hear more of that distortion factor that you want, really taking a front seat to everything. Going from voicey to what you're looking for. David Stoica says, my false chord scream sounds robotic even with support and I don't know why. When you notice your false chord scream, sounding a little monotone and maybe a little robotic, that's usually because of the ratio of how much vocal cord versus how much false chord movement there is. You might be somewhere closer to right in the middle, which weirdly enough is a good thing. That means you have a pretty 50-50 split and you're right in the middle of the sound, which means it's pretty well balanced. You're gonna wanna up a little bit of the support here in order to add a little more bite, a little more aggression, and just a touch more directivity to the sound, kind of like you're making a point in an argument as opposed to just making a calm statement. And that kind of middle of the road sound will start to intensify as you add the intensity to it yourself. And you get the freedom of movement and the more animalistic, more intense, lifelike sound rather than the lifeless robotic one that's probably been frustrating you up to this point. John asks, I'm wondering the best course of action to take for vocals starting out, just doing a false chord to actual lyrics. One of the best ways, if you're a beginner, to take your false chord to that level where you're doing sentences, words, full songs, is to start one word at a time. And I like to separate this from music for a little bit so we don't feel the need to crunch our way in and use too much effort. I like to have people look around the room, say the names of different things there. If you can get that false chord nice and open and neutral like you are already if you're a beginner, you can look at things like lamp, microphone, camera, couch, rug, room, and just really slowly start to go through single words. Once you're there, you can start to go through more than one word at a time, start to string different sentences together, slowly but surely, working on your air support along the way, and you'll find yourself getting to where you want and need to be. I have tons of stuff like this in our EVI Now program. Vociferous Mind asks, does having good cardio benefit scream duration? Good cardio and overall fitness helps so much not only with scream duration, but with our ability to vocalize in the first place, in every medium. being able to have good cardio makes it so your body is really great at oxygen management during rigorous activity. So if you're trying to hold screams for longer in general, your body's going to be more inclined to know how to handle the task of making that oxygen do what you need it to do, on top of the kind of training that I talk about in other videos. With that in mind, this will also help on stage, and it will help in rehearsals and in the studio as well, because as we move and as we perform, that also uses oxygen and energy. And if you are more on top of your personal fitness in whatever way you're able to, your body will be more equipped for the job. If I hold my false chord scream for too long, I might experience pain in the right part of my ribs, my liver possibly. I know that the obvious solution would be to just not do it for that long, but I'm afraid that if I ever do live vocals, something could go wrong. As soon as you start to actually experience real pain, that's when you want to reevaluate the way you're balancing any kind of vocal, taking it all the way back to the basics of what I always talk about with air pressure control, placement of the throat, and shape, and what you're doing with the sound. With what we're talking about here with a longer false chord scream, that sounds like an air-related issue, especially with a false chord scream, which does require more support and does use more of your reserves, more of your air in the first place. Doing a long false chord scream can be complicated. That being said, we do have videos about how to do these longer false chord screams and how to balance your airflow more effectively to make sure that you're really using all of the air that you have in your system before you even feel yourself get close to this kind of lower rib area and any of that sort of pain. But definitely make sure you reevaluate the way you're getting there in the first place.